Okay, everybody, welcome to our ongoing adventure Chassidut here, and we are trying to explore the Hasidic Kabbalistic basis of how to love each other properly without division and divisiveness and quarrels and all those kinds of things which plague us. So we're now starting the 6th chapter, and we're in the middle of trying to discuss how it is that brain or intellectual process can actually lead to unity. Because generally speaking, we associate the notion of intellect with dividing things into components, right? Making distinctions. We pointed out yesterday that when we make the halal on Motzei Shabbat, not the halal on the fire and the spices, but in the Shmona Esrei, that's particularly put into the blessing, which discusses dot, the capacity for intellect. So the idea of Hamabdil ben Kodesh Lechol, Beinor Lechoshet, God who divides between holiness and not holiness, between light and dark, making divisions, that's a kind of intellectual. The whole idea of almost the essence of the intellectual process is to make distinctions, dividing things up into its component parts. You know, like you read some of the more philosophically oriented thinkers, like the Rambam, for instance, or the Ramchal, even though one's a Kabbalist and one's not a Kabbalist, that, you know, they always start out, you know, this topic has 5 parts with each one 3 subparts, and each subpart has 2 component parts. It's like that's kind of this kind of way of thinking of analysis, dividing into parts. So I don't understand. You know, if that's what intellect is all about, then how could intellect lead to unity? It's dividing everything into divisions, right? So this is what he's in the middle of trying to explain, and this is really, really very deep. With a lot of great sages in the past 150 years, with the advance of science and technology, have pointed out how the world of science and technology have provided marvelous metaphors for understanding deep spiritual ideas, right? So, you know, as an example, so the notion that, you know, when we read our sages tell us that, like in Pirkei Avot, we saw this recently. I taught this in some other context, that that you should know that there's a hearing ear and a seeing eye, and everything's written in a book. It says that in Pirkei Avot, right? So that, in other words, everything that we say or do or think, it's recorded, right? There's responsibility for it. So kind of, I would imagine maybe even 20 years ago, kind of like, okay, it's a nice idea. It's sort of hard to concretize it, because we sort of think of the idea of you say something and it's like, you just said it and now you move on, right? So now with the advent of the internet and the way there is this digital record, surveillance cameras all over the place, every street corner, right? Yeah. And the NSA and all this kind of stuff, which of course has its all ominous overtones, but at the same time, what a great way to help us appreciate nothing is lost, right? In the spiritual worlds, every thought, speech, and action is recorded. Right? Everything's recorded, right? So technology has provided these metaphors. So this idea, which we'll begin in a second, I heard this unbelievable thing on one of these NPR science shows. They have these in the course of the week, and they talked about, there was like this, they were interviewing a couple of people that are in a field of physics, like that also deals at the same time with, it's almost like philosophy. It's some kind of like, it's some kind of almost interface between philosophy and physics, and like the beginning of existence. And they were talking specifically about how the world came into being, the cosmos came to being through this thesis and antithesis, that there's these kind of aspects of that were in the primal existence, that everything had a something and its opposite. You know, maybe a sort of a way that we learn. I'm not sure people believe in these things anymore, about protons and electrons, like a positive charge and a negative charge, of these kind of like polar opposite things. So everything that exists has the polar opposite. Matter, antimatter. So this is exactly what we're going to be talking about now. And because of science and technology, this idea of that everything has its polar opposite. That's exactly this idea. So chapter 6 here. Ubior and Yanhu. So now we're going to go deeper into this idea. That everything that exists, chapter 6, everything that exists on a hidden level, there is it and its opposite. Everything has the positive and negative, both charges, but on a level of hiddenness. Even when you look into the most essential aspects of something, everything has the positive and the negative charge, as it were, to use sort of everything has this kind of synthesis between the power and its opposite. That is from the aspect on the most essential level, more on essential level than the outward expression. We all know this, that you can sort of trace the manifestation of something from the most outward manifestation to the most inward. So for instance, when you say something. So when you say something, that's a very concretized expression of something that before you said it, hopefully, there was thought. Yeah. I think sometimes there's a bypass. Yeah. You see some people say, was that filtered through your brain? Okay, so there was the thought and there was speech, and then go back, trace that even further. You can go back into that thought was actually produced by certain capacities that are in the intellect, sort of pre-thought, right? Mm-hmm. And even those kind of pre-thought elements were flowing from kind of some essential level of the soul. Okay, so you can trace something back to its original source. So when you trace something back to its original source, even in there are actually both components. The positive and the negative. I don't mean that in a value judgment, positive and negative. I mean almost kind of like almost an electrical sense, like positive and negative charge. That on the essential level, you can actually, if you dig down into the very nucleus of all matter, you will find there actually the positive and negative charge, as it were. And he gives the example we just gave on with the level of the essence of the soul has those two elements in it. If you trace everything back down to its source, and as you trace it down into its original source, the positive and negative actually are there, but they're synthesized and integrated with each other. See, as you get further out in the levels of expression, going outward into more being manifest, there they look like totally separate things. But if you were to trace them back to their origin, it's sort of almost like this kind of parting of the ways, or I don't know, it's sort of like these, like make a diagram of, something comes down here and it splits, and then each one of those splits, but trace it back up the chart, goes all the way back to some kind of essential unity.
The hail of the plague of hail.
Oh my gosh. Did you cheat? That's exactly the example. God bless you. We have these like spiritual Kabbalistic geniuses in this room. Okay, but their day jobs, they're psychologists, but that's only their day jobs, so they make a living. Okay. Aflo kmo kochasmim. שהם בלתי מציאות ניכרת מכל מקום מבחינת כוחות. גם זה אינו שייך לומר שם. מכל מקום בהכרח לומר שהוא נושא כל הכוחות, שהרי ממנו נמצא כל הכוחות, וצריך לומר שהם שם מבחינת התקלות ממש, שכולם דבר אחד ממש. כעניין יחיד. I just want to move a little fast, so I'm not translating every single word. He makes this actually parenthetical statement, but it's kind of, he doesn't spell it out here, but I saw somewhere else where it spells it out more, that there's a difference in Hebrew between Yachid and Echad. They both come from the same root. So Yachid, well, let's start the opposite. Echad means one. Yachid means singular, Yachid. So, because when I this is a big mistake that people make. You say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, the Lord is Echad. So you know what you could think when you hear that word Echad? God is one, okay? But you could think, and it would be obviously a tragic mistake to think, well, God is one, but there's other things too. Right?
And other energies and other powers.
Yeah, like God is one.
So who's number two?
Oh,
Yeah, there's number
one
two
of them.
too.
Yeah.
Right. So but you say God Yachid,
It's unified.
unified, right? So that's a better word, even though there's reason the Torah chose to use the word it used. Okay. So that's the same thing here, that everything in the world is actually Yachid. There's a kind of, it's not, one as opposed to two or three. It's Yachid, this kind of perfect synthetic unity, without any real differentiation on an essence level. So now I was rushing because I wanted to get to Larry's point over here just to make his day. So he says, just like that's in the soul, that you actually have, if you trace things back to their origin, you have the positive and the negative. It's all there, both something and its opposite. You see this in the physical world. Mind. So he says, let's take the example of water. Larry, this is exactly your thing.
Yeah, because
So
that happened in the flood too. It was an acid rain with the fire inside.
beautiful.
The water.
So
Yeah.
water, yesh bo behelem davar miyasodesh. We usually think of as kind of archetypes or metaphors, fire and water.
Mhm.
Fire and water.
Yeah.
Those are like, there's two separate things, fire and water. As a matter of fact, they
Water
seem
without water.
wholly incompatible,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
You put the one destroys the other. Like you can put
Water
out
puts out
fire with water. You dump a bunch of water on the fire, put it out, or you could put some fire and the water. What happens to the water?
It'll evaporate.
It'll evaporate.
Yeah.
So they don't seem compatible. They seem they're polar opposites. But it's not really true, and Jewish tradition understands this based upon the Kabbalah.
Mhm.
So in fact, in water there's fire, and in fire there's water, and that was the barad. That was the hail that Larry mentioned before. That the hail which came down to Egypt actually were kind of fire ice.
Yeah.
Right? If we can imagine such a thing. So it's hard for a normal person to imagine such a thing, but that's actually a deeper Kabbalistic understanding of the positive and negative charges being exactly synthesized when you trace things back down to their essence. So even though you have the fire in the water and the water in the fire, it's just that the opposite is in a state of hiddenness. You don't see it with your naked eyes unless you happen to be a deep Kabbalist like Larry, who actually, when he looks at water, he sees the fire in it. And when you look at the fire, you see the water in it. Okay. On the level of obvious, the way we normally experience things, if you look at water, you see only water. You don't see any kind of connection with fire. They're mutually destructive. You look at fire, it can't connect itself with water. We're turning the page. It's because the fire in the water is at the utmost state of hiddenness. And see, that's the whole idea of learning Chassidut and Kabbalah, is the ability, to the extent that we're capable, to be able to see reality which is beyond our superficial experience of reality. To be able to sort of live life a little bit with X-ray vision, that we can sort of go through life with the ability to be able to use a CAT scan, a PET scan, all of these kind of technologies using, we talked about before, how science and technology is a kind of metaphor. Imagine that our eyes were these kind of imaging technologies that are used now in medicine to be able to look into something that just looks like a glob of flesh, and to be able to peer into that and see what's going on a more essential level through these different imaging techniques. That's what we're trying to train our eyes, to be able to see inside of the underlying aspect of reality, all of the things that people don't normally experience. Because what happens if you don't peer into you just see the superficial, then we have fights. When you can see that level of essence, that opens up the possibility to see underlying unities. Okay. שאינו ניכר כלל וכלל גם לעצמו, ולכן אי אפשר לו משום זה להתחבר עם האש להיות בהתגלות ומשפטם. כמו כן הוא ביסוד האש, אמנם כשמחלקים את. So even though superficially water and fire don't mix, if you're able to engage in deeper analysis, now you can start to see where this is going. What does our mind do? Our mind is our big image scanner. It's the secret to be able to see beneath the surface and to realize what's that inside something is actually and its opposite, that are actually both there. So through dividing things into component parts, you're able to see that there is fire and water, both there. The oldest Kabbalistic, I believe, it's the oldest Kabbalistic book that we have, is called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of, how do you translate that, formation. As a matter of fact, I think that Rav Aryeh Kaplan brought out an English translation of Sefer Yetzirah with very extensive footnotes, as Rav Aryeh Kaplan always did. He was an unbelievable genius who died tragically very young. And someone once gave it to me many, many years ago for a present, a congregant, and when I was in Los Angeles. It was like, kind of opened it up and said, because she knew I was sort of interested in these kind of things. I was looking at it like, maybe I look at this in another 20 years. It was like, so Sefer Yetzirah in the most obscure language, it touches on these things. Why? Because you know what it says there? It says in Sefer Yetzirah, at least we'll understand 5 words in Sefer Yetzirah now. It says there the following. The Sefer Yetzirah, Hotzi Eish Mimayim Mimayim Eish, that God brings out fire from water and water from fire. What does that mean? It means this, that in water is fire and in fire is water if you're able to penetrate down to the more molecular atomic level. Okay. Az yicholim litchaber litkalel yachad. And then you can see how things can become synthesized with each other because you realize they're not antithetical. There's a unity if you trace down. Ki ha'esh b'mayim im ha'mayim shebe'esh yicholim mitchaber v'alidei zeh mitchabrim ha'mayim im ha'esh. Ki ha'mayim alidei shemechalkim oto lechalakim motziim bo me'kocho v'chi alidei zeh nechlashu kocho. Now here's this, and this is the last sentence here, and this is an amazing idea. It's a powerful image. That once you can divide things into its component parts, then each part actually becomes, in a certain sense, weakened. So that's true with water. You know, water's over here. Water, do you know you have fire in you? Oh, it's like, and then, you know, and the opposite, you know, that was water over here.
Yeah.
Fire, you know you have water in you?
I won't live, I won't live.
Right? Nechlaku kocho, its power is weakened, right? See what happens? Because when you feel completely identified only with your most superficial and external attribute, then I am fire. So then when you look at water, what do you feel? Yeah, different and even adversarial, because that water threatens me, right? Fire and water, right?
Oh, they both threaten you.
Right? Each one threatens each other, right?
Right.
So, but if I tell you, you know what? You feel so threatened and antagonistic, you fire to that water. But you know something? Guess what? You're also water. It's like, so you're weakened in the sense of this kind of complete commitment to your fireness, which was your whole identity, even psychological aspects to this. So you feel weakened because that kind of compulsive grabbing of this singular entity of I am fire, and all of a sudden I'm taking something away from you. No. So there's a kind of weakening, but that opens you up to a certain softness, expansiveness, which allows you to then be able to unite with something else. So this kind of looking deeper and seeing component parts in fact leads to hikalut, synthesis. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. We'll continue Bezrat Hashem tomorrow.
You know what this reminds